How's that, Shannon?
I can see the slides. Thank
Good.
you.
Good. Hi, everybody.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and kick things off here. My name is Shannon Roberts. I'm a program manager with the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. Thank you for being here today. I also want to thank Cindy Christie for being here. She's running all the tech and all the things for me in the background. So if you do have any issues or any questions, you can direct them to her in the chat. All right, next slide, Cindy. Just as a disclaimer, we are a federally funded organization. The Peer Recovery Center of Excellence is a training and technical assistance center for the peer recovery workforce. And just as a reminder for all of our presentations, that nothing we say is implicitly or inherently endorsed by the U.S. government. Next slide, Cindy. So just a few housekeeping notes. We are recording this presentation and we'll be sharing these recordings on our websites and with participants. Please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. This just helps with background noise and things. You are absolutely welcome to come off mute if you have any questions throughout the presentation. Like I said, I will do my best to pay attention to the chat, but you're also welcome to use the raise hand function and I'll invite you to come off mute. And if you have a question throughout, there's also a question section at the end if you just want to wait to the end. After this presentation, you will receive the slides, the recording, and we'll also be going through a workbook that the CDC put together, and I'll be sharing all of those materials as well. Next slide, Cindy. Quick agenda for today. So this is our kickoff for the Learning Exchange series. It's all about, these will be monthly meetings. It's all about program evaluation and research in the recovery field. As I mentioned earlier, we're going through the CDC program evaluation framework. I really like it because it's a really easy to use and easy to adapt for your organization and your programming. And it just gives a really good high-level view for us in this presentation today of what program evaluation looks like. I'll share a few additional resources for program evaluation, and we'll do some Q&A, and I'll share information on our next meeting. Next slide. All right, as I kind of already mentioned, this is the first session of an 11-month series on program evaluation and research learning exchanges. We'll be holding them the last Tuesday of the month between now and August. November and December dates are shifted for holidays. They will always be at 3 p.m. Eastern. These are geared towards recovery organizations and peer recovery support workers, peer programming, but that doesn't mean it's you have to be part of those communities or groups to get anything out of this. We'll be talking, like I said, today we'll be doing a very high level overview of program evaluation, but the entire series each session will dive deep into evaluation planning and implementation, and pretty much everything I hit on a high level we'll get into much deeper in the sessions to follow. And in addition to this will mostly be presentation because it's our kickoff and our first session, but our goal is for future sessions to be much more conversational. And so we'll have a little presentation, but then also some learning exchanges. And Cindy will also be putting links in the chat throughout this presentation, including the link to find out more about these series on our events page. Next slide. All right, so I thought we'd just kind of start off with a couple polling questions just to get an idea of one, who's in the room, how do you engage in evaluation? And then also, what are you looking forward to? What are you interested in finding out? Again, today's session will be a very high-level overview of program evaluation as a whole, but we're wanting to design the rest of the series to make sure we cover the topics you're interested in learning about. So Cindy, if you don't mind launching the poll.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Oops, I have to relaunch. Can you all see that? There's two questions. So the top one is, what is your role in the evaluation of your peer program? You can check all that apply. I just want to double check that you're seeing it because I'm not seeing any votes come in yet. Yep, there they come. Good. Cool.
Nice. A lot of evaluation.
A lot of decision makers.
Perfect.
So let's see. Whoops. We've got 39%. So I'm going to leave it open for another 10 seconds, a long 10 seconds. So go ahead and get your votes in. I do see some of you are also doing poll 2, which is fine.
That's perfect. Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, Shannon, and we'll share results with everyone.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. Okay, you should be able to see those results. So
this is perfect. I wanted to get a feel for who was in the room. That'll help us design future presentations, and then also to give us topics to go over. Evaluation instruments, perfect. Okay.
You got the right people here.
Excellent.
Okay, let me get out of there. And are we ready for the next slide?
We are.
Okay.
All right, so I just wanted to start off with talking about what is evaluation. And folks, if you're welcome to come off mute and shout out your answers and ideas. There's no wrong answers. Evaluation can be a lot of things. Or if you're more comfortable throwing it in the chat, that's okay too. Any ideas in the room of what is evaluation?
How we determine a program is working or doing its job.
Yes, that's perfect, Rita. Thank you. And seen in the chat, assessing program health. Tim, measuring the outcomes of the interventions we're using. A process to review SWOT. Measuring outcomes. Nice. All right, next slide, Cindy. I'll share a definition I like to use, but no one has said anything incorrectly. Evaluation can be a lot of things, but from the book Utilization Focused Evaluation, Michael Klin Patton, evaluation is the systemic collection of information about the activities, characteristics, and outcomes of programs to make judgments about the program, improve the program effectiveness, and or inform decisions about future programming. So like I said, evaluation can be a lot of things. And like everyone said, there's very specific tools you can use to do it. You can look at different aspects of the program. You can be looking at specific parts of the process. You can also be measuring the outcomes. There's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot that you can do with it. And that's why we're having these series, to talk more about that. Next slide, Cindy. All right. So next, why would we evaluate? We talked about what evaluation is. Again, feel free to come off mute, shout out your answers, or put things in the chat.
Like one of the comments said, it's assuring that we're doing what we said we were going to do, especially if it's grant-based.
Exactly. Yep. What works and what doesn't. Improve. Yep. All great thoughts. Cindy, do you want to go to the next slide? Meeting the needs. Yep, Melissa. All right. So I kind of think about it in four parts why someone would evaluate. So accountability, right? Rita mentioned this, that may be to a funder. Like if we are managing a grant program, whoever funds that grant, we may have to answer to them like, hey, this is what we're doing with the money you've given us. It might be to staff, the staff working the program, to the clients or the community we're serving. Program improvement. Evaluation helps us to improve existing programs because it gives us a better picture of how our program is functioning. Knowledge development, it helps us to plan and fund future programs. And then also social justice, it can tell us that if the most vulnerable populations are receiving appropriate and effective services, or maybe if we're missing, if there are gaps in our services, but then if there are entire communities that we're not reaching and want to be. All right, next slide. And again, just to reiterate, monitoring and evaluation, it helps us look at results, activities, and resources. Next slide. All right, so, perfect. Thank you, Cindy. You're good, no worries. All right. So like I said at the top, the CDC program frame, it is not the end all be all of program evaluation. It's just a tool that I like to use to help understand program evaluation. And they also have just some really cool tools to help you walk through it if you're wanting to develop an evaluation for your program for the first time. So I'm just going to use it to give us a very high level of evaluation, program evaluation for today's session. But before we jumped into it, I kind of wanted to, because we're representative of the recovery field, why might evaluation specifically be important to the recovery movement? Feel free to jump off mute or put things in the chat.
Oftentimes I hear, this is Tim, also from the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, full disclaimer. Oftentimes I hear that there's a need for this sort of work in order to build credibility through a systemic and academic lens that we hear very frequently, particularly peer recovery support services don't have enough evidence or data to back up their efficacy. And so oftentimes there's a need for this in order to do that. I think also, for me at least, I have a high level of interest in learning about this thing because so much of the research and evaluation that gets done is not done through a peer lens, but it's done typically through a clinical or academic lens and they claim to be supporting the peer workforce. And so for me, a lot of my interest in this is being able to do this through a peer specific lens.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. A lot of funders and quote unquote professionalized fields, they use evaluation to build that evidence base. And that's something where, just like you said, the peer workforce just hasn't quite made it there. And I'm not saying that to be prescriptive, but just to say that the folks who fund and who have resources that could help build our capacity, this is the kind of thing they're looking for. And I think there's a huge opportunity to create it with a peer lens. Just looking at the chat, justify funding to give us validity as a budding field. Yep. To stay appraised. Yep. All great thoughts. All great points. All right, Cindy, next slide. To gain independence from nonprofit structures and restrictive funding sources. Yep, another great point. All right, so the first step in that circle is looking at engaging stakeholders. So the question you often want to ask yourself when looking at a program evaluation is, who are stakeholders who are involved in our program, who's funding our program? Does anyone want to share some examples of the stakeholders they might have in their organizations? Again, you're welcome to throw it in the chat or hop off mute.
We try to include our visitors or the consumers that come into our facility, because obviously we can't make a program without the invite of or advice of those that need the services.
Exactly. That's a huge point, Rita.
And then obviously it's the couple foundations that are ongoing, are always at the table, ongoing funding sources, and yeah, the list goes on.
Yeah, it sure does. It can be hard to track sometimes because you think about, for a lot of organizations that provide services to a vast community, not only do you have every, staff member in your organization, but then you have all of those different pockets of people and communities that you're touching through your services. And so they would technically be considered stakeholders. And how do you wrap your arms around that and keep track of all of that? I don't mean to keep plugging the CDC framework, but because I'm using it for this presentation, I will. This first worksheet is really great at keeping track and organizing all of your stakeholders. And they've got an example. You can look at the stakeholder name or however you identify them, the category, because you might be thinking about funders, or they're affected by the program, or they're involved in operations, their role, and then their specific involvement or notes. The other cool thing about all these worksheets, they're totally adaptable for your organization and functions. Thanks for sharing that, Cindy. So Cindy shared the link to the CDC framework. And like I said, they have the workbook and all the worksheets available to you. And yes, Rita, you will have access. So not only will the links be shared in the chat, but I'll also share all of them in the follow-up email. All right, Cindy, we can go to the next slide. All right, so the next section, or the next part of looking at program evaluation, is describing the program. Next slide. So this worksheet will just walk you through writing a program narrative for folks who have ever applied for a grant, or maybe put together a report for a steering committee or an advisory board. This is essentially your abstract, or that first section of the application where you identify the problem in the community and then how you propose to address that problem by going through activities and then anticipated outcomes. And it can just be a couple of sentences, but this will kind of be your launching pad for the framework of your evaluation to come. Next slide. So a lot of folks in the evaluation field, Tim, I see your question. I'll get to it in just a second. A lot of folks in the evaluation field will talk about logic models, and essentially logic models are a visualization of your process. You can think of it as like an entire list of if this, then this, or list of actions. So if I have a client walk into my organization, they first talk to this person. And then if they check these boxes, or if they are needing these services, then they go do this, or they go see this person, or they are referred to this service. So, and most of the time staff and folks who lead the organization already know inherently this, but sometimes it's really helpful to actually write it out. Again, this worksheet takes you through inputs, activities, outputs. Yes, a very fancy flow chart. Thank you, Cindy. But again, you can adapt it for however your organization works. But again, when you're designing a program evaluation, it's very helpful to really in detail list out the steps of someone entering your program from start to finish, so that when you're designing the evaluation, you can include all of those points of contact. Now to Tim's question, how do you determine I think it depends on what you're wanting to do exactly, Tim. Like, I think that's why it's so important to engage the stakeholders. And I think that's where a lot of program evaluation fails, is they do not involve, from the beginning, they don't involve everyone who is involved in the program in the first place. And if you don't involve, we have a session later this year that's all about, I think we called it participatory engagement. But if you don't have all the people who are touched by the program when you're designing the evaluation involved, then you're going to not have an evaluation that's inclusive of everything you do and is being done. So as far as translating, thank you, Cindy. Yeah, I don't have a black and white answer for you. I think it depends on the purpose. I think you will need to translate more. You'll need to translate more if it is for a funder, or if you do feel like your funder is more I don't know. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus or anything, but sometimes funders are pretty like black and white, and they do want specific language. And I think sometimes the best thing we can do just to get the resources is to translate for the funders. But I think it's also an opportunity to be a little more progressive and invite them into the field a little bit more and get to know the folks that they might be serving. All right, next slide. All right, so another thing that's helpful when you're designing program evaluations is organizing it by activities, and which is essentially what your network or organization does versus your outcomes, what your network or organization accomplishes. And again, this worksheet is just helpful in organizing those two different aspects. Next slide. So the next part of the framework is focus the evaluation design. And that's done by designing questions that help concentrate the evaluation plan, right? Like really narrowing down, like, okay, we've listed out what our program does, like how do we ask the right questions to measure each of those points? So we kind of split this up into process evaluation and outcome evaluation. And so process questions focus on how and with whom the intervention was implemented. These questions should relate to the activities and outputs section of the logic model that we did a couple worksheets earlier. And then outcome evaluation questions focus on the effects of the intervention has on participants. Again, what we outlined in the logic model a couple worksheets back. This is the process evaluation worksheet. There's a whole separate one for outcomes. All right, next slide, Cindy. All right, so CDC likes to call this gathering credible evidence. This is essentially your data collection. Next slide. So now that you've listed your program steps and interventions, you've decided on all of your questions that you want to ask, we start collecting the data. And so this tool right here captures SMART objectives, which those are goals or objectives that are, I can't read this, but that's okay. Just a way to define your goals to make sure they're effective. But you don't have to use that tool if you don't want to, if it doesn't fit your organization. But these evaluation questions, they provide helpful things to consider in order to gather the necessary info. Thank you, Lindsay. Yes. Just making sure the SMART goals is to make sure they're measurable, obtainable, timely, that sort of thing. Anyway, so this tool right here to gather the necessary information to answer the evaluation questions, such as what measures need to be obtained, how will these measures be obtained, who will collect the data, and what the time frame is for data collection. All right, next slide, Cindy. Yes, SMART is the acronym. If you Google SMART tools or SMART goals, it'll be your first or second thing on Google. All right, so justify conclusions. So this step is really talking about analyzing the data in order to draw conclusions that are soundly and reliable based upon the information collected. But before the data can be analyzed, there are a couple steps that need to occur. So next slide, Cindy. So this worksheet in the framework will help you do that. There's a couple of words that get thrown around when we talk data analysis. Data compilation involves pulling all the data together into one source. This is also called data aggregation. This is mostly done through Excel. There are fancier options out there if there's some real statisticians in the audience, or if you have some real, I don't want to say real because that means like anyone doing any sort of data analysis isn't necessarily real, but there's additional tools that can do more complicated data analysis if that's something your organization is looking for. Argus, yeah, there's SPSS or SAS. Compiling data allows it to be summarized for different groups of data, and then that data can be compared with other groups of data. There's also data cleaning, which involves a systemic review of the data to check for and resolve any mistakes and data entry. This could look like typos, missing information. Katie put another tool in the chat, RStudio. And then data analysis, that's a review of all. So once you've compiled it, you've cleaned it, then we're ready for data analysis. That's where you're looking at trends, gaps in information. It can differ based on the measure being used. So if we talk about quantitative data, that looks like calculation of tallies or averages. So like number of clients seen, number of peers trained, the more advanced statistical analysis like t-test or chi-squared. For quantitative data, that entails a summarization of trends and what has been said. So that could look like if a client has come in and has seen, has interacted with your staff at any point, and maybe they fill out a survey about how they felt about their interactions, that's considered quantitative data. Or review a training, perhaps. That's also quantitative or qualitative. And then we look at data presentation. So that's once we take it from our raw form, like when it's simply a set of numbers or a messy Excel sheet, and then we present it in a clear and understandable form, like a pie chart or a graph. Or if it's that qualitative data, it may be a summary of key points, or it might be some quotes, some informative quotes that we pull out. Xavier, I saw you come off of mute. Do you have any questions?
No, I just came in and I'm sorry. I just
Oh, no need to apologize. We're pretty informal around here. So thanks for being here.
Yes. You're welcome.
All right. So a couple key points from this is that analysis does not have to be complex or involve sophisticated technology. Some analysis can be done by simply combining data together and looking at the numbers or words and patterns that come from that. Compiling and cleaning the data are essential processes. Otherwise, the conclusions gleaned from the data can't necessarily be justified. It is especially important to analyze data in the early stages of program implementation to determine whether program process objectives have been met and whether the program is being implemented as it should. Later on in the process, data can be used to determine whether objectives are being met on a monthly or quarterly or whatever time frame makes sense for your organization. And then outcome evaluation questions can be explored. All right, Cindy, next slide. So now we move on to ensuring use and share lessons learned. So essentially this is using the conclusions from the data to improve existing programs, plan for future programs, and engage the stakeholders by informing them of program status, progress, and impact. Thus, sharing the lessons learned is a form of engaging stakeholders, which brings us full circle. All right, Cindy, you can go to the next slide. So again, this worksheet kind of organizes your way of how you present and share your data, ensure the evaluation is being used, and how to share the lessons learned. It can be used for many processes, like understanding how your program is implemented, determining whether or not program activities are conducted as planned. This can look at assessing program effectiveness. What is the impact of the program on participants, on the target population? Are there populations we're missing? Are there gaps? Identifying training and TA needs. Do staff members need additional training to ensure the process or objectives are being met? And then also allocating program resources, like, do you need to allocate additional resources to training, or do we need to shift resources around? Should you apply for funding or other additional programs and interventions? And then on top of that, you can use all this data collection to apply for more funding. All right, next slide, Cindy. All right, so I just kind of wanted to open it up for discussion for the evaluators in the room or the non-evaluators in the room. What is one thing you wish program staff knew about evaluation or about your role as an evaluator? And then for the non-evaluators, what is one thing you wish evaluators knew about your program or your role? And again, you can throw answers in the chat, or you can come off mute and discuss.
So I have a small but robust, as I like to say, nonprofit. We only have 5 full-time staff members and 7 part-time staff, to the point that when I say part-time, some only work 4 hours a week.
Okay.
So for me, I've been with the agency for 17 years, so I've worn 1,000 million hats, and I write the grants and I evaluate and I, everything. But my big thing on my end is I can't stress enough with my staff how important it is to collect the data and to stay on track with and why we collect the certain data or why we do the evaluations that we do. I guess for me is I'm always looking for any trick of the trade that, what is going to catch them enough to really truly understand what I'm trying to portray. Because, I have 80% of my staff is in recovery, paperwork and all that kind of stuff. They just want to help people. It's not on the top of their list for the paperwork. And so, I can only sweet talk it so much, in the sense of, if you want a paycheck, you have to collect this info. But, that's not the way I want to go about it. But always, I'm always looking for different tricks to really just make it kind of come down home that, like, we depend on this information. It has to be accurate. It has to be done. And you can't just say to someone, well, I don't really know why we collect this, but I have to. So can you give me this answer? Just really, we talk about it all the time, but I'm always interested in different tricks of the trade of how people address that with staff. So.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rita. And I know in past roles in my own, I've felt that before, like the difference it made when someone was explaining to me that, hey, this is why, like, they explained the why behind, this is why you're filling out this form, this is why you're asking this client these questions and filling out this form with their responses. I think that's the crucial step. But it sounds like you've said you have communicated that to your staff. I want to open it up for folks to respond to Rita. Have you seen success in being able to communicate the why?
So I think for me, it was also about, like, the not only communicating the why, but also going through some of it, and if possible, weeding out some of the things that aren't really necessary to just shorten it, right? Because it is a lot of work, and it can be overwhelming at times. So, I mean, even small things like if there were sections of of the GIPRA, right, that we didn't have to answer, I would go through and I would cross that out on the page and then send it out to my team, right? So they knew that didn't need to be answered. They didn't even look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a huge. I think all of us who are involved with any aspect of GIPRA probably have very similar thoughts, Lindsay, and um and yeah, I think that at least for me, and I know getting the GIPRA changed is a lot. Diane, I'll get to you in just a sec. I see your hand. That would take a lot of advocacy, and I don't think it's not worth it, but I think if you're a more immediate solution would be really focusing in on internal evaluation that is meaningful to you and your organization, and really creating something that is not only useful from a data collection perspective, but also to the staff who are conducting the evaluation. And the other thing I found is I know I'm speaking mostly in grant funded terms, but a lot of times project officers like to see that information. If you can say, hey, here are our GIPRA numbers, but here's our evaluation that we've designed, and here's why we're collecting it, and this is why it's meaningful for us, and how it really tells a better story. I think project officers like to see that, and I think funders do too, and it can help continue that funding stream. Diana, I didn't want to lose your question. You had your hand raised.
Oh, it wasn't a question, but it's more of a comment. I think there is a movement where funders are also looking at evaluation differently, and not just a whole bunch of data collection and assessments, that are really trying to get the perspective, particularly I think in the peer support movements, right? Because getting participants in the program, they involve in the evaluation more so than just data collection. And I think that's why one of the reasons perhaps some of us that perhaps have more training evaluation are coming to a program, to a series, to learn more about how can we better evaluate and to serve the population that we are looking into serving, and not just collecting a whole bunch of data and nobody is looking seriously. Some of the data that have been collected, I don't think it's being looked at even from the evaluator's perspective. And that's just not a good use of everybody's time, right? So then I think there is a need that we come together and design in the beginning what is most meaningful and what is most impactful for going out to get grants, to promote our services, and also to ensure that our services are impactful to the population that we serve.
And I think that's like with the GIPRA. So this is our first year and a half of working through the GIPRA, and we have it through one grant. And then in July, we started another federal grant that has it. And it is very hard to get coaches, recovery coaches and things like that to truly understand, because it does look so clinical, and the fact that we are not. And the concern, is it was brought to them, well, some of these questions could be triggering, and it could cause, this, that, and I'm not a counselor. And I'm like, yes, we understand. We, and it's hard, when it's coming from the federal world, it's very, very difficult to explain to them, because they're researchers and they just, well, you just got to do it. You just got to do it. And, we've been able to, with one of our grants, we've actually been able to talk with those that kind of tweak the design to fit, in a sense, the program that it's for. It's not drastic difference, obviously, because it can't be, but they were able to work with us. But they still, it's a program where we might get an intake in, but it may never have an actual individual discharge and follow-up, because it's a program where, we struggle to keep contact with them in the first place, so helping them to understand. So then when they're asking us for an 80% success rate, we kind of on the backside, we laugh, because it's like, well, we can't even get that in the work that we do, so it is, yeah. sorry, that's probably like way off topic, but that's my, that this has been our first experience with that GIPRA. And, from my end, yes, I get it. I understand why it's there. And so I've done everything I can to sugarcoat it as best I can. But I do see the frustration in my staff and the understanding why, like, this is just, this is not what we signed up for. And
Right.
that's, but I'm like, if we want to continue getting this grant, we have to have this. So
No, Rita and Diana, you've both shared excellent points, and you're not alone. And I think that's I don't want to say it's just, but that is the catch-22 of all of this, right? Is that there is a gap between the evaluators and the things being evaluated. And it can be a hard line to walk to. And I think that's why we're having these discussions. And I love that you're all here and thinking about this. And I think the thing I'll just offer is to work towards creating program evaluations that make sense for your organization, and keep communicating that to funders and project officers, because it is one of those things where you just have to keep having the conversation before change can happen. Tim, your hand's up.
Yeah, that makes me think of like when you were talking about gathering the stakeholders, that I think oftentimes what I hear from employers and evaluators is that they don't count their staff who are actually providing the services as part of the stakeholders. And so when they're designing like their evaluation tools, or they're deciding, should we go for this grant or not, they don't actually ask the peer staff, like, is this actually peer work? Is this actually peer support? And so I would love to see that voice being centered more in terms of determining, is this appropriate funding for our organization to go for? Should we continue with this grant? But also, where is the opportunity for the higher ups, the EDs, the evaluators, whoever's in a higher position, to be able to go to that funder or the people who are requesting this data and say, this just isn't appropriate. What changes can we make? Maybe we can't change the entire thing, but there has to be something that we can do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Tim. And, I will always iterate this. And like I said, we have a future session planned on involving peers at every level of that program evaluation. But that, to me, that is a crucial point of any program, not just evaluation, but also program design, is making sure that before you implement it, you do have everyone at the table who is involved, whether that's, if we're thinking program evaluation, the person conducting the evaluation, the person who's in that room with that client filling out the form, and not just everyone just needs to be at the table. Yeah, Marjorie.
Hi, everybody. I'm not sure what everybody does, but I run a community center, a recovery community center. And it's just really interesting. Like, I really like this because, like, that's why I wrote in the chat about, like, not really having a history. And I really think it's important for at least for our center. We've only been in existence for a few years, really a short period of time. And, I report to the state and all this, but this is so much more like succinct. And I think that you can also sort of see stuff. And then like and we're still working, the grant was given to us like in 2018, we're still working with the same amount of money for our community. And so I think it's really helpful to sort of put pen to paper and like really like map this all out, because I don't think there's it's ever really been done. I mean, I have a certain format, but I think this gives room for more thought, more reflection, to see maybe and see what works and what doesn't work. I mean, we kind of do that, but it's sort of like, hey guys, what do you think?
Yeah.
And I think that, as recovery supports become, more and more the trend and grow, I mean, you want stuff that's, that's solid, not just, hey guys, what do you think? I mean, it's fun. We have a great time doing it, planning and stuff. But, yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to share that because I mean, I know we do GIPR where we are, but we don't do that. We're running like a lot of our stuff is just services to a community, to a community. So it's still sometimes it's a little hard to measure, but it's
Mhm.
possible. It's definitely possible.
Oh yeah, I think for a lot of places they can just get stuck in evaluating how they've always evaluated, and I tear it down and start again. Make it what you really want and need. There's that it can be a lot of upfront work, but the payoff is just so invaluable to me.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and like I said, like we've got a stable staff, thank goodness. And so some things work, some things don't. And I'm always I like to grow things. I'm a nurturer by nature. So, I think this would be very helpful in, like making that happen. So.
Yeah. Really good discussion. Does anyone else have anything to add or say before we move on?
I'll say that I think part of it too is really teaching, like not teaching necessarily, but working with your staff to help them understand that a lot of these questions like shouldn't be asked like you're in an interrogation, right? A lot of these questions come out of natural conversations that we should be having anyway.
Yeah, really good point. And that's part of designing a good evaluation is making it a natural fit into workflows rather than, this cumbersome addition to a point of contact. All right, Cindy, I think we can go to the next slide. So like I said, here's a list of additional evaluation tools. Cindy, if you don't mind putting those in the chat when you get the chance. And again, the slides will be shared afterwards. The CDC program evaluation is listed on there. There's the American Evaluation Association. They offer training and TA on evaluation, so you might check them out. Not only do they have free tools, but if you really are into evaluation, they're a good place to be a part of. There's also this organization called Better Evaluation. They have a manager's guide to evaluation. And then one of my favorite tools, and it's not just for evaluation, is the community toolbox. It's a free resource for all. It's got just about everything from designing a board of directors to starting a nonprofit. And they have an entire section on evaluation, and that link is there as well. Next slide. Any questions at this point? I know we just had some really good discussion, but any other lingering thoughts or ideas, comments? All right, next slide, Cindy. Just want to put in a plug for our next meeting. It'll be focused on outcomes thinking, and that is November 28th at 3 p.m. Eastern. The session info and the registration link are on that slide, and Cindy's beaten me to the punch. She's already got it in the chat for you. And it'll be focused on outcomes thinking. So outcomes thinking is focusing on the impact of your programs, on the community you serve. The session will examine why outcomes thinking is helpful for an organization, what this looks like specifically for recovery and peer organizations, and then how to promote it within your organization and through the work you do. So I think like the point Rita brought up, really focusing on how to have those conversations and present the why to staff, why we evaluate and why it might be helpful for your organization. And next slide, Cindy. Just a couple links how you can get connected with the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, our website, and then all the social medias. And I think that should be it. Cindy, is there a last slide? Just a big thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Shannon. That was great. We hope to
Yeah.
see all of you next month.
Yeah, and you're welcome to hop off if you need to get to your next thing. I'll linger on for a few minutes if anyone has any questions. I'll also put my email in the chat box if you just want to connect offline.
Shannon, I know you'll be on these, but I think, are we having our director, Adam? Are there other presenters on any of these sessions?
Yes, we're still finalizing presenters, and I also wanted to leave room if there was a lot of feedback about different topics, wanted to leave room to adapt the session topics. But yes, Adam our director will most likely be presenting the next one. But I will be on all of them, so I am point of contact.
And you're going to send us a bunch of stuff like that?
Yep, my file, you'll get it by the end of this week. It'll have the slides, it'll have a recording, it'll have an evaluation link because your feedback is important.
Yes.
And then it'll also have the workbook with all the worksheets that I know I flew by it. I was just trying to do really high level, but it has the entire workbook with all those worksheets. So if you're starting from scratch, you can walk through each of those worksheets with your staff.
Okay.
So you're gonna be sending this out via email, Shannon?
Yep, I will.
Okay, great, wonderful. Because I'm starting up a new startup for a nonprofit, and yes, I'm looking at eventually creating a respite center as well. So yeah.
That's great, Xavier. I didn't plug this in the presentation, but like I said, the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence provides free training and TA for all things peer. So reach out to me. I can help connect you if you have any additional questions for that peer respite.
Okay. Yes, definitely. And you said the Peer Recovery Center. Let's go.
Center of Excellence. Yeah, my email's in the chat, Xavier, and you'll get a follow-up email from me, so you'll have that as well.
Okay, great, wonderful, Shannon. Thank you very much, Shannon. That's my daughter's name.
All
It's a good name. We're good people.
Yes, and she is definitely, yes. And you too. Yes, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll see you on the 28th. Okay.
Cool.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
All right. If nothing else from folks, Cindy, I'll let you go ahead and close out the room. Oh.
Oops. I didn't know if you wanted to chat for a moment. I see Melissa's still on, so maybe we can chat offline, but wanted to say a special hello to
Let's stop the
Bethany
recording. Let's stop the recording real quick.
Let's record it. Great.